right, welcome to episode 4 of Navigating Aquatics with Ace. As always, I'm joined by Phil in New Zealand, Wes in Chicago, and we've got our very first ever guest. Ryan Collins is joining us from Texas. Thank you, Ryan, for being on. You guys, hopefully, if you watched the first few episodes, you know who me, Phil, and Wes is. So, without any further ado, Ryan, I'll kick it over to you and just a quick little intro of who you are, what you're up to, and why you're on the podcast.
So I'm the owner of Safety First Training, training company out of Texas. My background is actually from Ohio. I did pool management there and training lifeguards as well. So roughly a little over 50 different locations, 250 plus lifeguards. Now moving more into the training side of things, I help assist various city governments as well as local businesses on providing training, not only for lifeguarding, but also for CPR, first aid, emergency medical response, and also preparing them for the supplies associated with that too. So we help to get them the supplies that they need for all situations. We also have moved a little bit more into assisting with compliance, so ensuring that certifications for employees are being tracked and also that people are aware of when they expire so that they can get to them before they do.
Complete full circle.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Managing 50 facilities definitely isn't easy, that's for sure.
and understanding what I love about that, Ryan, I think that's kind of a great direction, is understanding not just that you have to be certified, but there's a timeline in which that certification has to be renewed, and then there's a process to make that happen. And I think you've done a great job of creating an easy transition to that, but then the equipment that's needed, and understanding that each department has needs, each community has needs, and each trauma has needs, and how to create preparation for that, from training to equipment and then long-term planning. I think you've really put it in a nice package. And what are some of the things, Ryan, now that we've gotten into that, what are some of the things that you've struggled with or that you've seen people struggle with regarding that full circle, from certification timing to equipment ordering to equipment management to even knowing what to put in a first aid kit on the first day of the job? Like, what are some of the things that you've run into?
One of the things I run into is typically for the majority of the people we work with, it's a one-person show. So from the management side, there is one person who is also the parks director, who is also doing all of the like activities for the town or business. So they're trying to juggle multiple hats, and there's not really a road plan for them either. They're trying to learn on the fly. A lot of them also don't typically have an aquatics background, so they're not already plugged into that world. They kind of get thrown into this kind of parks and rec management role that ends up being, yes, parks and rec, but the majority of it tends to be aquatics. So it's getting caught up with that, getting familiar with the terminology, also getting familiar with just general operations.
A lot of the guys that you deal with don't necessarily come from the aquatic background as such. They're just trying to feel their way through this minefield of all of the different, aspects of what aquatics is, because a lot of people think, especially not if you're in it, it's a bathtub and, you just fill it with water and away you go. Whereas those that are in it know that it's a lot more than that, So, so that's interesting. So most of the guys, they're just trying to, wear multiple hats and trying to figure out what the best way to do that is. And then you throw in certifications on top of that and everything else that goes with it.
Would you say, and you'll see kind of the roadmap we have laid out in ACE in a little bit here, would you say most of these people who get thrown into it, do they have a business plan or a guidance packet given to them by the city, by the council? Do they have any sort of paperwork, or are they just like, you go run the pool?
I just want to hug Tom. Don't you just want to go up and give him a big hug? He just doesn't know. God bless this poor guy. Go ahead, Ryan. What would your answer to that be?
That answer would be a big no. Most of the time, like if there happens to be some type of like manual, it is a staff manual that is general to the entire city or organization, is not aquatic specific at all. So if things aren't documented from the previous person, there's nothing there for them to really start out with. It's going to be a whole lot of, they need to figure it out themselves and or call on people from other businesses and cities to network with and try to figure it out that way.
Ryan, before we were talking earlier, you'd mentioned kind of two different paths that you've experienced, and Phil, and I apologize, I think you have too, is where do I start? What's the most common emergency? What's my Band-Aid? And you'd mentioned in our pre-conference, everybody has minor first aid kits. And then Ryan, I think you really hit home with us when we were prepping this about the big traumas and getting people to understand that there is a separation between I skinned my knee and we need a tourniquet. What is that?
Yep.
How have you dealt with that?
It's something that's a little bit hard sometimes to get through to people because it's not something they see every day.
Mm-hmm.
You don't typically see a major bleeding event. Most people probably won't even see it in their lifetime. But the one time that it happens, somebody can bleed out in under 3 minutes. And most of the time, if you're talking about a typical response time from EMS, let's say that it takes you about a minute to figure out what's happening, call 911 in the US. After that, it's going to take at least a minute to 2 minutes for your dispatcher to actually understand what's going on and actually dispatch the correct units to where you are. And then most typical response time in the US is anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes. So already now we're talking about anywhere from 7 to 10 minutes total. And in that case, that 7 to 10 minutes is obviously longer than 3. So if you don't have a plan for it, unfortunately, that's not going to be the outcome that you would like in that situation. So when you say it like that, I feel like a lot of people understand that this is something that they need to think about and they need to plan for. Then it becomes, well, how do I do that? In the US, there's a lot of emphasis, especially from the federal government and the US Department of Defense. They have a program called Stop the Bleed, which focuses on bleeding control as well as tourniquet application. It's a great course. You can do an online only element to it, although I think you get the best if you do a combination with in person actually getting to try tourniquet and actually packing wounds as well as applying direct pressure. I think that's great to add that on, but obviously if you can only do the online one, I would prefer you do the online one.
Sure.
It just provides a lot of background information on life-threatening bleeding and what you can actually do to prevent it.
That's great. And thank you. So one, Stop the Bleed. And Phil, what's that like overseas? How does that compare to what you've dealt with and what
I was just going to say it's really interesting doing these because it's a great learning opportunity to see how it works in the different countries. And again, working in Australia, the difference between Australia and New Zealand isn't too far. There are differences, but they're relatively similar. But it's interesting. So touching on a couple of the points. So like in New Zealand, like you're not really allowed to operate without a pool specific manual. So we've got this accreditation thing over here called Pool Safe, which is run by Recreation Aotearoa. And what that does is it provides the public with quality assurance that you're following the rules, and that's, you've got to have your manuals in place. You've got to have all of your emergency plans in place. You've got to have, full risk management plans done. And there's a whole bunch of things that go in there. And then every year you're audited. So right now, for example, the pool safe audits are going on. So all of the pool managers, and I'm sorry for all of the Kiwis that are watching it, but they're all going through a hell of a time at the minute because they've got to get all of these different documents in place to prove that they're operating. We've got something over here in our Health and Safety Act, which is you've got to do everything reasonably practical to avoid an event happening. And again, very different legal systems from New Zealand to the States, obviously. So that's where we kind of operate in that world. So it's quite interesting, to know that, and I feel sorry for those guys that have to try and figure this out with zero base knowledge.
That's the key.
Where's hit the nail on the head before you do what your predecessor leaves you. That's the only thing you can go off. And by the sounds of it, we're very lucky over here that at least you're walking into a manual. It might not be very good, and I've walked into some shockers in my time. But at the same time, there is at least a baseline there. And I suppose the other interesting thing is and there's always debate about the right way to do first aid and all of that sort of stuff. But like we wouldn't do tourniquets, for example. So we're advised against that by our people that do the first aid over here. But we, I suppose, don't face the same sort of dangers as what you guys do as well. There's a lot of added things that you were going on, and again in that pre-chat, and I hadn't even registered in my head, about like you say, the chances of a shooting and that sort of thing, and needing to be able to react to something like that, understand what's going on, be able to respond. Having all of that equipment in place is so necessary. But again, on the flip side of here, we do check box by death by checklist in New Zealand. But what that leads to is the checklist isn't actually followed. So you've just got a lifeguard that's just ticking it off. And I would say that's one of the big problems that we face over here, is how do you, for those guys that have never lived through it, how do you get the importance of having all of those things in place?
Brian, I think I've got another question, and then maybe we can take a look at some of the safety things we've got in ACE, and maybe what you think of those. And when you go to, say, the city of Austin or the city of Dallas, and you say, hey, look, you guys aren't prepared at your city pools for X, Y, and Z. I can provide X, Y, and Z. What's the usual response you get from them? Are they quite open to working with you? Are they like, no, we're fine? What's the usual response you get when you go into these places?
Majority of places want to do their training internally, so they would prefer to have their own staff who do the training, and at times that can be great, especially for cost saving in the moment. But what you get to is the instructors learn from the other instructors, and they end up learning the wrong thing, and they continuously teach the wrong thing. So in the end, while yes, you might be saving a few bucks here, typically you end up costing yourself more in that, hey, this class was taught improperly. Let's say something gets audited from their training provider, and now all of those staff no longer have certification. So they actually run into a bigger issue by doing things internally typically.
And to your point, I think there's another crossover in the culture, depending on where you are in the United States and how much support you have. To your question, Tom, and to your answer, Ryan, I think if you've got a ton of support, you might have options where you can get outside of your direct organization, or you can get supplies from somebody else. But if you're in another part of the country, you have to fall in line with what you've got, and whether the resources are there or the opportunities are there, this is just it. There's nobody for 100 miles. There's nobody. And so this is another reason why I like ACE. It's another reason why I'm glad, Ryan, you're our first guest. And I know before we run out of time here, I think that's another real opportunity for people to really pay attention to what we're talking about, from the digital resources to the virtual Stop the Bleed training to the online classes. All of it's accessible if you're willing to kind of understand the scope, right? The first thing on the checklist is Band-Aids. The last thing on the checklist shouldn't be your trauma kit. It should all be kind of together procedurally. And so just to kind of crossing over all the dynamics that are in play here, I think it's a wonderful mix.
So, yeah. And one of the things I really like with that safety first training that you do is, you kind of cover all of that safety stuff, because as we've just highlighted in that last conversation, it differs so much from country to country what's expected of your lifeguards. I remember when I was, trained in the UK, our lifeguard course is so different in the UK compared to what it is here in New Zealand. We used to have to sit through a 2-week course. First aid was incorporated as part of the lifeguard course. And then I moved to New Zealand, and there's 2 separate qualifications that you've got to do, side by side. And for you guys, it's even more complicated because it's state by state, so
and organization by organization. Sorry.
Sorry. Absolute minefield. And I think the fact that you've kind of pulled everything together so that it fits and people are able to follow something really simple. And I think that's what we've been trying to do with ACE as well, is create that, this really simple processes that you can put in place that we probably spent a long time figuring out how you do that process. But then, I definitely see part of my job now, I'm getting older, is, we want to be passing that knowledge on, and we want to be getting people easy to understand. And I think this digital age is bringing it even easier to do that, because you can just create that information at your fingertips, for like for a subscription, you've got everything you would ever need.
I think kind of flying by the seat of our pants here a bit, Phil. Do you want to pull up a bit of the ACE and see what Ryan thinks? And risk risk probably makes the most sense to dive into and see what Ryan thinks.
Yeah, definitely. So the aim of the whole subway map is there's 8 overarching processes with 65 sub processes underneath those, and they go from everything to what's your risk assessment procedures, what's your incident response, what's your evacuate, those sorts of different things. And if it goes from every aspect over aquatics as well. So
first things first, it tells you that those categories even exist. Sorry, to the whole point of our conversation, and I know we can slice and dice this, but to the whole point is, I don't know what the 8 categories are, so let's tell you that 8 categories exist to the person that maybe, and if you are an expert, let's make sure they're coordinated. Sorry, Phil, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, because some facilities, for example, might be really good at their customer journey. That might be nailed. Their signage might be perfect. They, like their customers are well informed. They, all the rest of it, but they've got no idea what they're doing on maintenance. And they don't know how to, renovate a facility, because as we all know, running those, they need some TLC every now and again. Like we like to leave them as long as we can, but that's when you have a massive close down as opposed to doing, short and regular maintenance, or, what's a budget? I remember that was one of my first head scratches when I was first stepping up.
Yeah.
So if we have a look into the risk to resolution bit, the whole purpose of this is it addresses your risk management processes. We within ACE, we don't go into the specifics and like what you've got, because there's already so many great organizations out there doing those very specific things. So again, as always, it starts with an assessment. So we'll go through, these are the different things that the ACE system gets you to think about in terms of what is your risk. So real simple to use, you've got your 1 to 5, which covers, 1 is not very good. 5 is, we've got that in place. And then along here, it's a really simple exercise just to tick a box. So do we have a risk? How often do we check our risk assessment? Do we ever do that? If you don't do it, you leave it blank, and then you know that it's something that you need to address in the future. And then part of what we want to be doing is, again, linking in with the likes of you, safety first training, all of that stuff, so that the information that is relevant to that facility is then available for them, because it varies so much from place to place. And then you go through, do you have a risk evaluation matrix? Do you have a risk register? Again, first aid kit inventory. Have you got one of those? Do you know what's actually in your first aid kit? And do you know what should be in your first aid kit, So, for example, you go through that checklist and you go, oh, we don't actually have an instant accident form, so we're not recording what happens. We're just kind of sticking a band-aid on and, moving on and hoping for the best. And then the whole aim is that this is then editable. So it talks you through, well, this is what you would, this is what you need. This is the type of information that you want to be collecting. What happened, what time was it?
Because to what equipment was used, to what organization was involved with the recovery and the trauma, to all the way to that whole point, Phil, of something happened. What did we use? What did we clean? How did we clean it? And who did we get help from? Anyway, so that kind of layers. I know, Ryan, you're involved in a lot of that support plan as well with the local communities too. So this gives that opportunity there.
So I see this and I see this is perfect for a lot of my clients, and especially the ones who are just starting out. They can get in and start moving quickly in setting up these procedures, actually having these policies documented as well. So I like what I'm seeing for sure.
Yeah, I do want to go back to that one pager, Phil, only because I think it summarizes that sheet that you just had up. My hope, Brian, is that you took away what you did take away, but also that in your mind you could visualize this in representing not only the ACE system, but kind of what you do and say, look, do you have this as a cheat sheet? And if
I would have to say probably one of the problems I see the most, and it was actually it was an idea that was highlighted on that last page as well, was training with your local emergency services. It's something that actually doesn't even cost you anything to do. And most of the time, your emergency services love it. They want to be involved
all the time. 90. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask. Sorry, They love it. It is their anyway. Yeah, I couldn't be more excited about this subject. Keep going, Ryan. No, but no fireman will say no to hanging out in your pool and having a good time. They love it. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, no, and you have to think about it as well from the point of view of your lifeguard staff. And I mean, in the US, we're talking most of them are about 15 to 18. Typically out, you get some older, but not always. So how many of them have actually interacted with somebody in your emergency services department? How many of them have made a phone call to 911? How many know what a dispatcher is going to ask them?
In
How many are
second grade,
thinking about those types of questions?
they came with the mask in second grade, and you got to hear them breathe in the mask, and that was about it. Sorry, go ahead, but that's it. That's all you get. Stop, drop, and roll, and Sparky the fire dog, and that's what you get.
Exactly. And I've been in situations where, I've had lifeguards who had to call 911, and most of them freeze up in that moment as well. They're like, well, I don't know what to say. And obviously, to a dispatcher's credit, they're trained for that situation. Um, they're able to typically calm people down and get the information that they need. But think of how much time is potentially wasted in that as well. So if you could have somebody thinking through, this is what I know already, my local first responders are going to ask me on the phone. I can have that information down. So right away, I can be like, exactly, this is my location. This is the pool that I'm at. This is the name of there. And they already know where they're going. They can start sending units out there while they collect more information. So just going through that, it's a simple thing to work with your emergency services and actually do training with them. But it's probably the most beneficial training you will ever do with your staff.
And it's, I love that you create the importance of that, just like it's jumping into a drowning child, just like it's the pressure of CPR. Knowing and being calm in that moment is as equally important to the positive outcome as it is every other step. And I love, Ryan, that you approach it with the same intensity or philosophy that says this is all congruent. And you can jump in and rescue somebody, but if 911's at the wrong door, we miss. You can get AED going on somebody, but if I didn't give them the right information, we miss. And so I think it's really valuable that you've associated those as a really collective thought and made sure that it's taught that way.
Is there any other aspect of the system that you want to have a look at, Ryan, before we finish up?
I'm kind of interested in that hire to retire.
Yeah.
Exactly what all that covers.
Yeah, cool. So the aim of hire to retire is, again, I think we talked about it before we started, is we want to find good people in the industry and we want to bring them through and show them that this is a career. Like I started out, this is a summer job. I'm not going to do this forever. And what I've found is a lifetime of fulfillment, working with awesome people, working with passion, and doing something that I love on a daily basis, and that's turned that into a career. So this has been built with, and this isn't just built based on aquatics either. This is built on how do you find the best staff, how do you train them, and how do you induct them, and how do you get them in the door properly, and then how do you keep them motivated, and how do you develop them, and how do you keep them until they want to stay with you for life. If you don't tell someone what their job is, they're never going to do the job you want them to do. And then you get, as a manager, you get frustrated because you're like, why are they not doing what I want them to do? And they're not doing because they don't know. Nobody goes into a job purposely trying to do it wrong.
One of these are designed 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, a check-in system, so that when somebody that's new, that doesn't know what they're doing, or somebody that has 50 pools doesn't get lost in the system, they can say, for this 2 weeks, we're going to do X. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to, and not have to feel like all of it's happening at once. I mean, I know the screen is big and there's a lot on it, and I'm interrupting Phil, so strike three. But also wanted to make a note that while it's a lot, it's really designed to read progressively and to be achieved progressively, as opposed to somebody saying, here's a 300-page manual, find the right chapter. How does that do to your brain? Does it get the hamster wheel spinning a little bit, or what do you take away from that?
Oh, definitely. Gets the hamster spinning for sure. It's looking at this and saying that, this, even when I was working as a manager and a supervisor, I was like, this would have been perfect to have.
It's what Phil and I say
Now,
every day. Keep going.
yeah, it was, I got thrown a manual and essentially told figure it out. And which was great. They did have a manual, but
Right.
it didn't go into everything. And especially, let's say, if I worked at like a city, for instance, things
Oh.
are a little bit more regulated too. So there is a process that you do have to go through with hiring. But even talking to some of the people I work with in cities, onboarding plans are mostly non-existent. And quickly you figure out that these new people that you've hired are not doing things the way that you want to. And I think people want to go straight to let's write them up rather than did
Oh.
you actually give them the skills to succeed? And that's a big thing. I see this as something that can really help change that mindset of, okay, my staff did something wrong. Did I prepare them? Did I give them the tools to succeed, or am I just expecting them to read my mind?
But I think that's kind of another light bulb that was relit in this conversation is, and we said at the beginning, we've said it again several times, is I'm a lifeguard, now what? I'm a lead swim instructor, now what? I'm a head guard, now what? And Ryan, you've done it from management to supplies to safety to local municipalities. We've done it in our careers. Tom's learning it. And this system really drives that answer, I think. But not only the system, but the philosophy behind it is people getting together and saying it can be done. You can get out of the pool. You can get out of swim lessons. You can get out of your swimsuit and you can be a leader in this industry. And here's some experts and tools to do it. So that just really kind of reignited that thought. So I appreciate that. Any last words, Ryan, before we take any more of your time and figure out how to edit this thing?
I'm really excited with what I see here, and the potential to also go to some of my clients that are just starting out as well, and being like, here's something that you can use that can help you out with getting started. Because as much as I've had the experience, I'm not in that day-to-day role anymore. I'm not creating most of these policies and procedures or checklists or anything. Um, and my way of doing it might even be outdated now too. So it's,
Don't
you
date
know,
us. Don't date us,
how,
Ryan.
how,
We're
how can
old.
I assist them? I've got a different mindset now as a business owner and focusing on training. I don't have that same mindset of running a facility day in and day out.
That's fair. And
Right.
they don't have the mindset that you have of what's missing within my operation. Again, why we're glad to again remind you our first guest here. But again, that's a great approach of how can we, and that's why we want to do this is try to combine resources, combine expertise. That's why Phil started the podcast. That's the idea behind it. So thank you. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I think.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
wraps
been
up the
awesome to
episode.
catch up, Ryan.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah. Nice to meet you, Ryan. We'll safety first. We'll chuck the link to your website in the YouTube clip, and hopefully people give it a visit and give you a call. And then if anybody listening or watching has any questions or whatever, feel free to reach out to us. And I'm sure Ryan, you'd say feel free to reach out to yourself as well. And then that should wrap up the episode, and we'll see you guys next time.